Would you look at that? 15 seconds later, and I'm watching it still. Yee!
Apple Bloom's head was spinning, her vision slowly returning as she climbed to her hooves. As the little filly regained consciousness, she was surprised to find herself standing outside. Her head hurt, and there was a dry taste in her mouth. Had she been running?
Sand.
Up to now, she hadn't budged while having these memories.
We put some
This
dirt
time, though, she seemed to have travelled quite a bit while unconscious. Cautiously, she felt her chest and head with her front hoof. That last memory felt so vivid, she could have sworn she had taken the blonde pony's place. She looked around at her new surroundings, familiarity taking hold of her as she realized where her recent recall had taken her. Some of the scenery had changed,
forest,
but the general area looked all too familiar. In front of her sat a dirt path leading through a line of trees.
Go back to
The opening
Twilight.
was shrouded in darkness. She looked back to the thicker parts of town. The party still raged behind her. Yet this part of the town she now stood in lay oddly still. Apple Bloom knew her chase was nearing its end. The little filly puffed out her chest, steeled her nerves, and stepped into the dark woods once more. The shadows of the trees engulfed Apple Bloom.
Don't get lost now.
As she followed the path into the undergrowth. The glow from the town's lanterns illuminated the exit she had taken, but the rest of the thicket was dark. Only sparse illumination from the moon above managed to pierce the canopy in places. Apple Bloom trotted forward carefully, trying not to lose the path in front of her. Soon, the glow from the town had vanished in the distance, and the filly's whole world became shadows. Suddenly, a flicker of golden light...
Okay, I'm gonna have to be real with you for a second. I'm just not feeling it. I'm sorry. But I'm kind of bored. I'm sorry, but I am a little bored right now. It could be the story's fault, could be my fault. Honestly, it's probably my fault. I'm not gonna lie.
Zipped between some trees in the distance. Apple Bloom stopped dead, scanning the trees and listening. In the distance, she could just barely hear soft laughter.
Bum 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 ba-da-dum.
Golden light shot past Apple Bloom, flying deeper into the woods. The little filly galloped after it, swerving around trees and jumping over roots in her way. She kept seeing glimpses of her culprit, but couldn't seem to catch up.
Keep going. You're almost there.
Keep going.
It almost sounded like a
gas
taunt.
pedal.
This drove Apple Bloom to even greater speed. She rounded another line of trees, skidding to a halt as the path ended. In front of her sat a large cabin nestled between the trees. All signs of the golden light seemed to have vanished as Apple Bloom crept up to the house.
Man.
It looked like it was abandoned, but as she approached, Apple Bloom detected a faint light within. The windows were shuttered. She tried the door. It was locked. How was she supposed to get inside? She wandered around the house and discovered a crumbled well. In its prime, it might have resembled the same one within the town.
Any rubies
Apple
in
Bloom
it?
saw some flecks of red on a particularly jagged
Maybe a
stone
squirrel.
on one side of the crumbled structure. Instinctively, she reached out and rubbed it with her hoof, a sense of familiarity washing over her. Apple Bloom's ears twitched as a loud clicking noise came from around the corner. Abandoning the well, Apple Bloom
Somebody's clicking the
galloped back
pen.
around to the front door. A faint glow faded off the doorknob as the filly approached. An eerie creaking came from the hinges as she pushed the door open. Apple Bloom did not let that deter her. She marched boldly inside the house. Empty.
Give me my money.
The entire house was empty. The entire place was
what a
coated with layers
surprise.
upon layers of dust. The only remarkable thing to speak of was at the back of the room. A fireplace, fully lit and crackling.
Oh, just a fireplace.
Applebloom
Just fire.
sighed, coughing as she accidentally inhaled some dust.
After all that, a dead end. Really?
She walked over to the fireplace and sat in front of it, thinking to herself as she warmed her body by the flames.
Put the fire
She
out.
wondered who had lit them and whether they were still close by.
Put
Or maybe
the
this was
fire
more
out,
of the
please.
strange time magic curse Mita had spoken of. Maybe this fire had been lit years ago, and the magic of the forest had never let it go out since then,
I don't
though the
trust that
house
fire.
itself had been abandoned.
Nothing. All
If I
this
would
for
kill my
nothing.
father.
I thought for sure that here was where I was gonna find the answer of what happened. But ain't nothing in here but this fire.
Applebloom sat
Fine.
upright as her eyes fell
Fire.
properly upon the fire. The logs inside looked like they had been sitting there for a long time,
I wish I had a
longer
fire
than they had
counter.
any right to be.
That would be
Underneath,
nice.
wedged within the hearth, was something white.
Hey, it's a
Applebloom
thumbnail.
leaned in closer, the heat of the flames making her brow sweat.
It's a corpse!
There
We got
were
the corpse.
a lot of little
Oh.
white things, slotting together in places to make up some kind of bigger shape. Applebloom stared, realization slowly creeping over her.
It's the Grey Pony.
The whole fireplace was filled with bones.
Oh, that's
Her
it.
small heart quickened, the beat amplified by the stillness of the house, as she was lost to the darkness again.
Bro, how many times are you gonna give me a vision? Just let me chill, please. Hey, it's an actual fire.
Her
Would you look at
eyes
that?
slid open. An orange glow flickered to her right as she looked around. The soft grey of her coat was marred by the ugly brown rope that hog-tied her. She tried to speak, but her voice was muffled by a rag tied around her mouth. Her vision went wild, searching for some kind of help as strands of her blonde mane fell into her eyes. Through her bangs, she could spot shadowed figures standing across.
Do you think if I tried hard enough, I could go this? I can like sleep with this on, just like go to bed with actual death and horror going on in the background.
the room. They were all looking at her.
This can't be happening. First Gladstone.
Oh,
now
it's
this
a
one.
gun.
It's only a matter of time before the whole town ends up like these two. We need to find a way to stop these marks from spreading.
Well, it seems these marks can't simply be burned off to stop their capacity to infect others.
Okay, but it is.
Graham
It's
said
only
this
one
mayor's
mark.
appeared on her just moments ago. Through glass, no less.
It's a curse, after all, not a disease. Maybe it sensed our intentions to destroy it and jumped from Gladstone to her.
If this curse can multiply, it could jeopardize the whole town. It could
a
even
mark.
infect one of us if we don't stop it soon.
Bro, what
She
the
saw
frick is
them
your
all
problem
shiver
with
at this notion. The door opened. A pony walked in and over to a table. Panic-stricken, she wiggled her hooves again, trying desperately to free herself from the rope.
it? You ain't
Her
getting mad
mind
at this one,
raced
Buster.
with fear.
Then it seems we don't have any more options, gentle colts. We'll have to
Burn.
stop it right here, right now.
Burn the
How do you expect to
ponies.
do that, Greyhoof? We don't have any unicorns in our town to remove the magic.
And if anything, this proves that trying to cover the mark on one pony to save them can make it jump to another nearby and damn them instead.
We shall just have to try removing it by removing the source, then.
She watched as
Death.
the dark grey stallion who had branded Gladstone grabbed
Knife.
something from the table.
Greyhoof, you don't
Yeah.
honestly intend to.
Can you think of a
Hey,
better
apple.
way?
Knife.
Because I can't, and we're running out of time. We could lose the whole town to this. Think of that. All those mares, stallions, fillies, and colts.
And mares. Don't
Lost.
forget mares.
To a curse that covers them in evil marks
Or did
that
he
make
say
them
mares?
nothing more than puppets on strings to whatever those pictures show. Every pony dying because the marks didn't show things like eating, drinking, or sleeping.
What?
She watched as the other ponies regarded their options, all nodding in unison.
You
Make it
idiots.
quick.
A flash of silver caught her eye as Greyhoof took a step closer. She tried to plead with the village elders around her, but could only manage a muffled scream. Tears streamed down her face as the knife in Greyhoof's mouth drew close.
Ugh.
Her heart raced, panic gripping her. She closed her eyes, whimpering, and unable to watch anymore.
Imagine she gets a cutie mark for murder. Ooh.
The cold slice across her throat was indeed quick, but the pain that followed was unimaginable and prolonged. She felt sticky liquid pouring out of her. She managed a gurgled scream, but it served no purpose. It was already too late.
Oh,
She
God.
could feel her lungs pulling in one last breath, trying in
Squeamish.
vain to hang on to the life they had taken from her.
Squeamish
Please,
warning.
Everfree, forgive these dark acts that we have done.
Dude, the force is like a
Hooves
god to
gripped
them.
her.
Oh my god.
Lifted her, took her to the fireplace. She felt herself land among the flames, but luckily she was already too far gone to feel, as they began to consume her fur and burn her flesh.
Oh, wow.
All around them, the magic of the Everfree forest pulsed in growing fury.
Remember, kids, don't cause forest fires. Always be careful with knives.
Applebloom
No.
screamed and clambered to her hooves as the memory wrenched itself from her. Or was she wrenching herself free from it? Frantically, her forehooves went to her neck, expecting to find an open wound. Her breathing was laboured and deep, and her little heart raced faster than it ever had before. She tried to look away from the bones, from the gaping skull in the centre of it all, still caught in the blonde mare's last desperate, useless scream.
It's gonna come to
But her
life.
eyes refused to move.
It's gonna come to life.
All Applebloom could see was the red of the fire, the burning lies, and the poor pony who had been murdered here.
It's gonna come to
Her
life.
little game of detective had taken a hideous turn, and Applebloom wished desperately that she had listened to Mita and gone home instead of continuing in her quest for answers about this awful town.
Hey, you really should have
She
just left.
ran, bursting out of the house and into the woods, galloping
Run
toward
like the
town.
wind, Bullseye.
She had to tell some pony, any pony who would listen even a bit. She had to tell them
Toy
that
Story
the village
3 not so
elders
long
had
ago.
caused this to happen to them, had cursed them that night when they angered the
2 hours ago.
Everfree by trying to stamp out the wild, untamable magic of cutie marks. Applebloom slowed as she rounded the curve in the path that led to the town. The glow from the lanterns was extinguished, leaving only more
no.
darkness ahead. How did they manage to put out all those lights so quickly?
It was a trap.
It did not bode well.
was a trick.
Applebloom
The
hesitated.
bamboozle.
Before her was pitch black unknown, but behind her was a mausoleum and a dead end.
Jump
She had
in.
nowhere else to go but back into town.
Jump
The
in.
exit to her own path,
Wait, what?
back towards Zikora's house, was on the other side of the terrible place.
How did you know that?
The thick stench of blight overwhelmed Applebloom's senses as she passed through
remember
the
that.
trees into Sunnytown. The name now seemed a horrible choice. Every single building and structure looked collapsed and decaying. The soft grass
Oh,
had been
wait.
replaced with hard dirt and sticky mud,
So
and
that
what
mean
was
the time
left of
things-
the party decorations looked ancient and riddled with rot.
Does that mean the time
Applebloom
is
stood
dying?
perfectly still. Everything
But the
around
time's
her
going
was
away.
quiet.
The time thing
She
is going
slowly
away.
trotted forward, weaving her way through the dilapidated town and avoiding the mud patches. Applebloom peered into one of the collapsed homes as she passed it. Nothing but rubble. Then, a frightening voice growled out and shattered the silence.
There was no other way.
Hollow Knight
She would have
sucks.
infected the whole town. We couldn't have that. There was no other way.
Applebloom looked all around,
I'm kidding, Holloway
but
doesn't
no
suck.
pony was there. Where had that voice come from?
The bench system
She continued
sucks.
forward, fear rising inside her.
I make
She
my
rounded
case.
the bend deeper into town when another noise reached her. It sounded like roots tearing. She turned in the direction it
Weirdos?
was coming from, realizing it was over by where she had met Three Leaf before.
There was no other way.
She stopped dead as a grime-covered hoof erupted from the ground, pulling with it
Zombies.
a macabre shamble of bones, sinew, and rot. The figure
Zombies.
took the shape of a pony. Only it wasn't. It shambled forward with a lurching motion, stopping a few feet from the filly. The
Blech.
creature looked down toward Applebloom, staring at her with empty eye sockets. A red light began to rise in the monster's vacant skull as it opened its mouth.
The curse mark. It befell her this very night. The elders told us. They told us we would all have been in danger if they hadn't taken care of her.
The creature spoke with an unnatural echo in its voice. Applebloom took a step closer, looking at its features. The thing still had a small amount of earthy green mane left.
Three Leaf?
What remained of the zombie pony's jaw wobbled, forming a hellish sneer.
That's right, darling.
What happened here?
You got it
What happened
right.
to you?
Good job.
Three Leaf stood silent for what seemed like an
Doing
eternity
a great
before answering.
job.
She had the mark. She had to go. The curse mark. Befell her this very night. The elders told us we would have all been in danger if they hadn't taken care of her.
You knew they killed an innocent mayor just because she earned her cutie mark? You knew?
Applebloom yelled at the zombie pony, trying to seem brave.
So Free
In
Leaf's the
truth,
villain.
she was scared out of her wits. Another voice broke the silence behind her.
Please stay with us.
Be quiet. I'm trying to get some sleep.
We'll never let the same thing happen to you.
Applebloom twirled to face this new voice.
She wants
Another
peanut
zombie
butter.
pony was standing
Idiot.
directly behind her. This one was taller than Three Leaf, and its skull was squarer. Time did not age this one well. There was nearly no flesh left on it at all. Applebloom squealed, stepping back. How did this one sneak up so quietly? Her
He's
rump
got the stealth.
bumped into Three Leaf, making a
He's a ninja.
sickening squishing noise as rotting flesh oozed onto her back. Applebloom shivered in fear and disgust. She began to feel woozy, like something was draining all the energy right out of her.
Until...
Her whole world began to spin around as more and
Until-
more energy left her body. In blurred vision, Applebloom watched the other zombie pony lean in close. It spoke in a gnarled voice, its eye holes flickering like red flames. Flames in a fireplace, still burning around the bones of a pony who died years ago.
It's the Wi-Fi password.
You'll never become like her.
What do you mean? I'm not trying to become like anybody.
Promise. We'll protect you forever.
The grey hoof zombie pony lunged forward, trying to snatch Applebloom between its forelegs. The sudden movement snapped Applebloom from her stupor. She jumped
Hey,
away
picking the
last
mic
minute,
there, Arby.
barely managing to slip through its grasp before bursting into a full gallop. She ran deeper into town, hoping to escape the pair. Both zombie ponies began to stumble after her, unable to match her speed. They opened their grisly mouths and let out sickening wails. Apple Bloom had managed to get to the town center before hearing another gruesome moan. After it faded, another zombie pony began to uproot itself near the town well. Its skull turned toward Apple Bloom the second it was free of its earthy prison.
It had to be done. The elders said so. They said it was for the best. For the good of the town. For the good of the town.
For the good.
Apple Bloom ran past it, ducking under a slow, sweeping strike as she passed. She stopped short at a massive wall of rocks that had been piled between her and the pathway out. It stretched the entire length of the town square and was far too high to climb over. The zombie pony were slowly walking toward her, eyes alight with rage.
Get them
She
demon eyes.
nervously paced back and forth. How was she going to get over this? A golden
Right.
light circled one of the rocks in the wall,
Hey,
catching
there
Apple
we
Bloom's
go.
attention
Spirit pony.
only for a moment before quickly vanishing.
It's the
She ran
squirrel.
over to the rock, trusting the phenomena and nudging it with her hoof.
Give me
It
a
was
squirrel.
loose. Apple Bloom shoved her shoulder against the rock, pushing it with all the strength her little body could muster.
Okay,
The
we're gonna
zombie
get a
pony was
squirrel.
getting closer.
We'll protect you forever.
Apple Bloom gave the stone one last shove, finally dislodging it.
Bam.
She knelt down and wiggled her way through the hole, just as the zombie pony fell in a clattering of bones where she had stood.
Get it back in the middle.
She breathed heavily. Suddenly, being small was having its advantages. She barely
Amen,
had time to catch her breath
sister.
as two more bony hooves erupted right next to her, clutching at her as she galloped away.
I'm not actually sure, by the way. I'm not sure.
She had made it. The edge of the town, back where she had first entered it. The large table that once held the food
could
for the
make it.
party had been
You could make it.
overturned, its contents mouldy and decaying in the soil. The fields that had once been so full of life were now blighted and bare. Apple Bloom galloped
You can make
forward,
it.
the gap into the ever-free forest growing wider with each step.
Please, don't leave.
Apple Bloom skidded to a halt. This
Bruh.
new voice sounded like it was in pain.
It's the gray
All we
pony.
want is friendship. We'll protect you. You are safe from the cursed marks.
She turned
There's
to
no
see a
need,
pair of zombie
though.
ponies standing where Romeo and Starlet once were. Something inside her wrenched in sorrow for the two. Their love had never had time to become anything. Their lives
Sad.
had been stolen by the Elder's murder as much as the blonde mare's. It wasn't fair. Both sets of their glowing eyes
Life isn't
were
fair.
set on the little filly. Maybe if she talked to them, maybe she could make it all better.
Reason
Maybe
with the demon.
they could escape with her,
the
leave this
devil out
terrible
of her.
place
Beat the
and the
devil out of
magic
it.
that had ravished it. She took a step forward, stopping as another thought struck her brain. Or maybe this was all a trick. They both wobbled like they were sensing her thoughts.
Leave. Don't leave. The others won't like it.
Please do.
Can't let you leave. You can't ever leave. None of us can ever leave.
Apple Bloom turned tail and made directly for the exit to...
You see? But like, okay. You can't leave. Have any of you actually tried, I don't know, actually walking out of the forest? Because I don't know about you, but I feel like that's a pretty revolutionary movement option. You know, just... You know? You know?
To the Everfree Forest. Before she could reach her goal, one last zombie pony began to dredge itself out of the earth between her and the path.
Don't bite her.
Apple Bloom whinnied in protest. All this work just to be cut off again? She braced, preparing to charge through if need be.
Or just jump over it.
Something was different about this one, though. Its body wasn't nearly as decayed as the others. In fact,
Grey pony?
it was still mostly whole, save for a few rot marks and holes in her flesh. She
Grey
even
blonde
still
pony?
had eyes. This zombie pony walked right up to Apple Bloom with little effort, choosing to
grey
focus
pony.
her gaze on the two behind her instead.
Definitely
These
Grey
fools.
pony.
Even in death, they just don't understand.
Her voice was clear, lacking
Well,
the eerie
it's
echo
great.
the other zombies possessed. Apple Bloom looked this pony over. Her dirt-covered mane had a deep maroon sheen in the moonlight, and her decaying coat was patched with grey splotches. Her eyes still boiled with the same red light of the others, yet Apple Bloom
Demon
thought she
eyes.
saw a tear fall from one.
Aw.
The zombie pony looked right at her, sighing deeply, and closed her eyes.
I should have protected her, but I made my choice that day. I chose not to listen to her, not to follow her. I chose to let my fear overwhelm my friendship. This is our
Yes.
everlasting punishment for our sins.
No.
It's what we deserve.
Apple Bloom
No,
reached
not
a hoof
really.
out, patting Meter on the side of her foreleg.
Kill
Little
two
one.
ponies.
Why did you stay?
I guess my curiosity just got the better of me. I never would have guessed this was what you
Actually, you know what? I retract that statement. Forget I just said
were
that.
trying to protect me from. I'm so sorry.
Don't be.
Actually, I
The
retract that
ponies of
statement
this
as
town
well.
deserve every drop of this curse, and I'm no exception to that. I had the chance to stop her, to protect her, but I failed her as a friend. I abandoned her when she needed me most.
Bro, I'm gonna
Now I
shoot
have
my
my
phone.
own sins to bear alongside those other monsters. Cursed to relive my regrets of this night every year. But you, little one, you can escape our fate. You aren't bound here. If you leave before our replaying of this night is done, you still have hope.
Another tear fell, and Mita opened her eyes again, giving Apple Bloom a weak smile. Apple Bloom almost wanted to give her a hug, despite her rotting form.
Hugs.
Their peace was interrupted as the rest of the horde caught up. Their moans and wails were
What is this, Call of
unbearable,
Duty?
forcing Apple Bloom to cover her ears. Mita pulled the little filly back to her hooves, looking her in the eyes with renewed vigor. They were eyes that had been hurt, eyes that suffered and endured centuries of pain. Now those eyes held a new feeling, though. One
Demon,
of righteous
evil.
fury.
Yeah,
Mita
anger.
stared at Apple Bloom and spoke very clearly.
I'm
Sadness.
done hiding. And I'm done being the scared little pony that cowers away from her problems behind a closed door. You've taught me tonight that I need to be strong, and I need to protect the ones I care about.
She stepped to Apple Bloom's side, nudging her toward the town exit.
Are you Mita?
Run,
Are
little
you
one.
the
Run
Grey
as fast as
pony?
you can. Keep running and do not stop until you reach the outside world beyond the poison joke boundary.
With that
Who-
final
are
command,
you Mita?
Mita charged into the mob of zombie ponies, a
Oh, it was
stream of
Mita.
tears
Oh.
falling from her eyes.
Oh.
With one mighty headbutt, she sent the
Oh,
forefront
thank you,
of the
Mita.
group scattering like bowling pins. The rest of the herd became disorganized and frantic at the sudden attack, confused that one of their own would so brazenly defy them.
Booga booga.
Apple Bloom ran for the tree line as the mob enveloped Mita, glancing back to her savior before passing through.
The curse! Yes. Oh.
Zombie ponies gnawed and bit at her, but Mita would not yield. As more and more zombies dogpiled the poor pony, Mita managed to pull her head out from the crowd one last time.
What are you waiting for? Run for your life!
Apple Bloom nodded and galloped off into the forest, suppressing her own sadness for the sacrifice Mita had given her. She wished she could have brought the other pony with her. Wished she didn't have to leave her to that fate.
I wish
the
I could
Everfree
sleep because I'm
Forest was
tired.
alive with movement.
Almost 2 a.m.
Wails and moans of zombie ponies echoed through the trees.
Well, move,
Every
hey.
bush was her enemy. Every turn yielding nothing but more skeletons. The forest grew darker with every minute, the moonlight extinguished by the thick canopy once more. Apple Bloom counted her blessings that Zombie Pony's eyes glowed where she...
Counting the blessings. 1, 2, 3... okay, we had 0 blessings.
She would never have seen them coming in this darkness. In the distance, Apple Bloom could see a patch of moonlight ahead of her. She was almost to the poison joke field. Abruptly, a slimy sensation wrapped itself around one of her hind legs.
Survive.
She screamed in horror. A zombie had managed to latch itself onto her.
Is this where Twilight
The familiar draining sensation began to pour over her again as the zombie opened its mouth.
We'll protect you forever.
The zombie did not get a chance to finish as Apple Bloom brought her free back hoof into its skull.
Oh!
The adrenaline from her scare had nearly doubled her strength, and her little hoof cracked the bones of the zombie's face. The creature released its grip, and her energy came surging back. Apple Bloom charged headlong into the thicket, heart still pounding from her encounter. She spun around, looking for her next path. There was none. Nothing. Every part of the woods had closed in around her, leaving only the scattering of moonlight and the moaning of her pursuers.
That is
She
scary.
slumped to the ground, heart sinking in her chest.
No.
So this was it. After all that, all she could do now was wait for her demise.
I just want to go home!
She screamed into the darkness.
Cutie mark.
Apple Bloom's sobbing slowed just enough to hear it. Or rather, not hear it. All of the moans and growls that were pursuing her had suddenly ceased, leaving nothing but quiet. She looked up, raising a brow in confusion. What happened to all the zombies? As she wondered this, a new sound broke the silence. A sound like that of clopping hooves. Apple Bloom leapt back as a golden glow erupted underneath her.
I'm so confused.
In the dirt sat a pair of hoof prints bathed in golden light. As the clopping sound continued, the prints began to move as well, etching a path directly into the brush in front of her. Apple Bloom blinked, confounded by this turn of events. She started following the hoof prints, pushing herself through the brush and trees as the trail bent and swayed beneath them. Then, finally, it stopped. Apple Bloom wasn't sure where she was. She had gone so deep in the woods, the darkness made it almost impossible to see. Before Apple Bloom could take another step, a golden light pierced through the darkness.
My eye!
Apple Bloom covered her eyes at first, lowering her hoof to behold a familiar mare standing before her.
It's the grey
She was grey, with a blonde mane streaked with gold. Her eyes gleamed with a golden light.
What do you want
now? The
now?
ghostly pony hovered there in front of her, smiling.
Hi!
Hiya! Oh my god, she got a voice. She has a voice.
Apple Bloom hesitated. The ghost pony's happiness softened into a glum look.
I'm sorry I dragged you into all this.
Yeah, why did you do that?
Don't be sad. I don't blame you. I was just as curious as you used to be. So this is partly my fault too.
The ghost pony smiled again.
My name is Ruby. What's yours?
Ruby. Nice.
That's a nice name.
So glad to have met you, Apple Bloom.
A low moaning sound was growing in the distance. Ruby turned in midair, looking off into the woods.
Your cutie mark is a magnifying glass?
Apple Bloom asked.
Oh, she's got a cutie
as
mark.
Ruby's flanks came into view.
Oh yeah.
Ruby turned back to her with glee.
Yes! It turns out I'm really good at finding things. And I finally understand what that means, too.
I'm so sorry for what happened. Those town's ponies did such a terrible thing to you.
Don't be sorry, Apple Bloom.
If you're so good at finding things, find a way to fix the situation.
If anything, pity them.
Ruby floated effortlessly through the air, leaving a fading trail of golden sparkles behind her. She twirled upside down, directly above Apple Bloom, never breaking her smile.
They knew what they were doing was wrong, and they paid the price for their actions.
But they murdered you! How can you forgive them so easily?
You gave me
Apple
Reese's
found Ruby's
Pieces.
cheerful demeanor almost contagious, but
And
she still felt
M&Ms.
anger for what fate had befallen her. Ruby sighed and twirled around again, dropping to the forest floor next to Apple Bloom. She placed a hoof on Apple Bloom's shoulder. Surprisingly, it felt very warm and comforting to the little filly.
Still
Does
don't
no
trust
good
you.
to dwell on the mistakes of others, Apple Bloom. The ponies of Sunnytown were acting out of fear and felt no real remorse for what they did. The curse put on them by the Everfree Forest can be broken, but only through atonement.
So then, why don't you just make them feel sorry for what they did?
Making some pony feel sorry for their mistakes isn't the same. Unless they can find reason to be sorry for themselves, then their restitution is meaningless. They have to repent of their own free will to break their curse.
Bro,
Because of meeting you, my best friend is one step closer to breaking her curse now. Thank you for that.
Oh, nice.
The moaning turned to a rustling of leaves and clopping of hooves as 4 zombies came into view at the edge of the forest. They didn't seem to notice Ruby or Apple Bloom yet. Ruby knelt down close to Apple Bloom, bathing her in the light from her golden glowing eyes. Her smile was intoxicating. It made Apple Bloom unafraid.
Don't worry. I'm gonna find you a way out of this. I promise.
With those last words, Ruby's form began to fade away, leaving Apple Bloom alone in the darkness. The zombie ponies had all turned toward her and were shambling closer and closer. Apple Bloom stood her ground, closing her eyes and waiting. All 4 zombie ponies were now directly over her. Their rotting stench nearly made Apple Bloom gag. The group all leaned down, preparing for a coup de grace.
Just sit on the butt. Like the great Horatio would have done, hit him with the 1-2. And you kind of sound like Rainbow
Twilight
Guy.
Sparkle sputtered and moaned as she pushed her way through the
Did you seriously not notice how Blue was gone this whole entire time? Are you actually serious?
underbrush. The forest had gone completely dark since night fell, and she could only see as far as the light on her horn would allow her.
Apple Bloom, I give the little filly one very simple instruction. Stay put and don't wander off.
Okay, she
Then
did.
what does
She
she
did.
do? Exactly the opposite. I mean, how hard is it to sit still for 10 minutes? Yo!
She yelped as a particularly nasty sticker bush stuck to her leg. Twilight's horn glowed pale purple as her magic carefully plucked the bush's prickles from her coat.
I swear, when I find that little pony, she's going to wish she was still lost in the woods.
Twilight cursed loudly to the forest.
Yeah,
a loud growling noise caused the purple unicorn to shrink back.
Oh, I hope she's okay.
Twilight pressed on, her fear for Apple Bloom's safety growing more and more. She tried calling out to the little filly.
Apple Bloom, where are you? Oh, I should have never brought her. Applejack will never forgive me if anything happens to her. Wait, what's that?
A small golden sphere bobbed back and forth between the trees in front of the unicorn. She rubbed her eyes to make sure she wasn't seeing things. Twilight took a step closer, and the orb bobbed back deeper,
orb.
away from her.
Orb?
Twilight heard a faint voice coming from the direction of the light. Twilight recognized the voice immediately. It was Apple Bloom, and she sounded like she was scared and hurt. The purple unicorn reared up and charged forward in panic. The bobbing golden light kept pace with Twilight as she threw herself through bushes and brambles. She ran through the pain, the sounds of Apple Bloom's sobs her only focus.
Apple Bloom, where are you?
The orb that guided her suddenly vanished, leaving Twilight stranded in the dark. The unicorn stamped a hoof in frustration. She couldn't even hear Apple Bloom anymore either.
Oh,
no,
damn it.
I won't lose her!
Twilight called out to the darkness as she braced herself. Sparks began to fly from her horn as she conjured a large ball of light. The magic grew bigger and brighter, lighting up the whole area. With a jerk of her head, Twilight sent the orb flying off into the distance in front of her.
Oh my god, you just set off a nuke. Oh my lord, what did you do?
It happened all so fast. Apple Bloom had been standing there, completely defiant against her zombified attackers. They had all lunged at her in unison, but none of them managed to even touch her. Something loud, round, and bright had exploded over top her and the surrounding forest, illuminating the whole area as if the sun itself was shining overhead. All around Apple Bloom lay the crumbled bones of defeated zombie ponies, their remains slowly melting back into the earth from whence they came.
Yeah.
All Apple Bloom could hear was the call of a familiar voice.
Apple Bloom, where are you?
Twilight!
She hopped in delight. She knew that voice. Twilight Sparkle pushed her way through one of the bushes. She looked a total wreck. Her breathing was labored, and her whole coat was covered in mud and briars. Twilight spotted Apple Bloom by her large bow almost immediately, calling out to her again.
Apple Bloom! Oh, Apple Bloom, there you are! Thanks, Celestia, I found you!
Twilight!
Apple Bloom squeaked, embracing her savior with both forehooves. Twilight staggered under the sudden hug, but quickly righted herself with a smile.
What in the name of Equestria are you doing way out here in the woods?
Curiosity.
Did I tell you to stay put?
No, Twilight, I'm sorry I wandered off.
Okay, let's just get out of this creepy place. Who knows what kind of stuff is lurking in these woods?
Twilight murmured, quickly leading Apple Bloom back to the path she had taken. Twilight breathed a sigh of relief as the pair made their way back. Apple Bloom remained silent for the rest of the trip out. She thought about telling Twilight all about her adventure, but decided that it might be best to save it for later. It only took the pony pair a minute to reach the end of the Everfree Forest.
You should probably still tell her,
Ponyville countryside was covered in moonlight now, the sun fully set. Apple Bloom and Twilight trotted merrily away from the forest, heading in the direction of town. Apple Bloom paused as Twilight pressed on. She felt like something was calling out to her. She turned back to look at the Everfree Forest, catching just the faintest glimmer of gold among the tree trunks. Ruby's ghost was floating just under the canopy, wearing a smile on her face. She waved at Apple Bloom, and Apple Bloom happily waved back. Just as the two finished their goodbye,
bye, weirdo.
A second glow began to rise next to Ruby. This one had a faintly red aura about it, and her eyes glowed with a soft maroon sheen. Mita's ghost tapped her friend on the shoulder, smiling weakly as Ruby spun around to face her.
Aww.
Ruby's ghost leapt and twirled with excitement, latching onto Mita in loving embrace. Apple Bloom felt a tear drop from her eye as she watched the pair of best friends reunite, a feeling of utter joy filling her heart. Ruby and Mita both faced Apple Bloom and waved again, gleefully drifting back into the Everfree Forest. Before the two lights from the ghostly ponies faded, Apple Bloom could clearly hear both their voices calling out to her.
See you later.
See you later, friend.
See you in the sequel.
Apple Bloom
Just kidding, there
smiled,
was no sequel.
Turned, and made for home.
Oh, thank God. Oh my God, it's 2 a.m. in the morning. Oh. Well, not the morning, it's in the night. What? Yes, it is 2 a.m. in the morning. I don't know if I'm just tired, but I don't know. I just didn't really get into it, really. Which I really thought I was gonna get into, because everybody knows Story of the Blinks except for me. At least I got the context now. Now I have a little bit of understanding, because somebody, the Brony represents Story of the Blinks. We're like, yeah. But man, I just could not get. I just was not into it, man. It's probably because it's like 2 a.m. But like, I'm freaking tired, man. Like, I don't know. Surprisingly, very chill. That was a really good ending, though. I will say it was. I don't think they really explained everything well enough. Like, I still don't really know what the gray pony had to do with really anything. And Mita as well. I still don't really understand the whole curse and the whole schmucks and everything. Overall, it was fine. I wouldn't say it's bad. I wouldn't say it's definitely not bad. Just, I don't know. I guess it's just either not my style or, again, I'm just tired, but I'm gonna go shoot my phone now.